The funeral home was quiet except for the soft hum of air conditioning. Most of the mourners had already left, their whispered condolences and gentle hugs still lingering in the air like the scent of too many flower arrangements. Only a few family members remained, standing in small groups, speaking in the hushed tones that somehow always accompany death. Lily Chen stood alone before the polished wooden coffin, her dark eyes fixed on her father's face. He looked peaceful, almost as if he were sleeping, though something was unmistakably different. His skin had a waxy quality that no amount of makeup could disguise, and his hands, folded neatly over his chest, lacked the warmth and strength she had known her entire life. At 32, Lily had always understood that someday she would lose her father, but not like this. Not from a sudden heart attack that struck without warning on an ordinary Tuesday morning while he was tending to his beloved garden. Not when he was only 63 with so many plans still ahead of him. "Would you like a few minutes alone?" her Aunt Pat asked gently, touching Lily's shoulder. Lily nodded, unable to form words around the lump in her throat. Her aunt squeezed her arm and walked away, ushering the remaining family members toward the door with quiet murmurs. The funeral director approached with a sympathetic smile. "Take all the time you need," he said. "I'll be in the office. Just come find me when you're ready." And then she was alone with her father. The silence in the room felt heavy, almost tangible. Lily could hear the ticking of the wall clock, the faint sounds of traffic outside, and her own unsteady breathing. For the past 3 days since his death, she had been surrounded by people, well-meaning relatives, friends offering support, her mother who needed comforting herself. This was the first moment she had truly been alone with her grief. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking on that single syllable. Memories flooded through her mind. Her father teaching her to ride a bike, his patient hand steady on the seat as she wobbled down the sidewalk, sitting beside her hospital bed when she broke her leg at 13, reading her favorite books aloud for hours, the pride in his eyes when she graduated college, his unwavering support when her marriage fell apart last year. "I don't know how to do this," Lily said softly to the still figure. "I don't know how to say goodbye." She thought about all the things left unsaid between them, not because there had been any rift, but simply because they had both assumed there would be more time. Her father had been planning a trip to Japan next spring, something he'd dreamed about for years. He would never see the cherry blossoms now. He would never know if she decided to go back to school for her master's degree, or if she found love again, or if she ever had children. "I hope you knew how much I loved you," she continued, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I hope I made you proud." Outside the window, a soft rain had begun to fall, pattering against the glass. Her father had always loved rain. "Nature's music," he called it. Lily smiled through her tears, remembering how he would sometimes pull her outside during summer showers when she was a child, both of them dancing in the puddles until her mother called them in, pretending to be exasperated but laughing all the same. The rain seemed fitting somehow, as if the sky itself was mourning. Lily reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing against her father's hand. She had been afraid to touch him before, dreading the unfamiliar coldness of his skin. But now, in these final moments, she needed that connection one last time. His hand was cool beneath hers, the wedding band he had worn for 35 years still on his finger. Her mother had insisted he be buried with it. "He never took it off in life," she had said. "I don't want him without it now." More tears came as Lily gently stroked his hand, noting the familiar calluses from years of gardening, the small scar on his knuckle from a long-ago carpentry accident. These hands had cradled her as a baby, applauded at her school performances, and wiped away her tears through every heartbreak. "I'm going to look after Mom," she promised. "And I'll keep your garden alive, though you know I don't have your green thumb." She gave a watery laugh. "Remember how I managed to kill that cactus you gave me? You said it was practically impossible, but I proved you wrong." Talking to him felt both strange and natural. Part of her felt foolish speaking to someone who couldn't hear her. But a deeper part needed to say these things, even if only to the empty shell that had once housed her father's spirit. "The grandkids miss you already. she continued, thinking of her brother's children. Thomas keeps asking when you're coming back to teach him more chess moves. Her voice caught. I didn't know what to tell him. The room was growing darker as clouds thickened outside, the rain falling harder now. Someone had left a small lamp on in the corner, casting soft shadows across the walls. In this gentle light, if she squinted, she could almost imagine her father was just resting. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. Her father taking her to a butterfly exhibit when she was 8 years old. One had landed on his shoulder and stayed there for nearly 10 minutes. It thinks I'm part of the scenery, he had whispered, delighted, standing perfectly still so as not to disturb it. Lily had been amazed at his patience, his ability to find joy in such a small moment. That was who he had been. A man who appreciated life's quiet wonders, who found meaning in growing things, in building with his hands, in teaching his children to see beauty in the ordinary. I'll try to be more like that, Lily whispered. To notice the butterflies. The weight of finality was settling over her. Soon, they would close the coffin. Soon, they would lower it into the ground. Soon, all that would remain of her father would be memories and photographs and the stories they would tell about him. But not yet. Not quite yet. Lily took a deep, shuddering breath and leaned forward. She had been holding herself together for days, supporting her mother, making arrangements, accepting condolences with grace. But now, alone with her father, she finally allowed herself to break. I'm not ready, she sobbed, her composure crumbling completely. I'm not ready for a world without you in it. She laid her head gently against his chest, where for her entire life she had heard the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. Now there was only silence. It felt wrong, impossible that something so constant could simply stop. Through her tears, she whispered into the stillness, I love you, Dad. I will always love you. She stayed that way for several moments, her cheek pressed against the cool fabric of his suit, her tears dampening the material. This was the final embrace they would ever share, and she wanted to memorize the feeling, painful as it was. As Lily began to straighten, something happened that made her freeze. Was it imagination? Grief playing tricks on her exhausted mind? Or had there been the faintest movement beneath her cheek? She held her breath, her heart suddenly pounding. There it was again, so slight it was barely perceptible, but unmistakable to someone who had just been pressed against it. A flutter, a twitch, something. Dad? She whispered, her voice tight with disbelief. She placed her hand on his chest, pressing gently, desperately seeking confirmation that she hadn't imagined it. For several agonizing seconds, there was nothing. Then, beneath her trembling fingers, she felt it, the weakest, faintest pulse imaginable. Lily jerked back, a strangled sound escaping her throat. This couldn't be happening. People didn't come back from the dead. She was hallucinating, surely. 3 days of grief and little sleep had finally broken her mind. But even as she tried to rationalize what she'd felt, she was already backing toward the door, her eyes never leaving her father's still form. Help, she called, her voice thin and reedy with shock, then louder, more urgent. Somebody help me. The funeral director appeared in the doorway, concern etched across his features. Is everything okay, Ms. Chen? Call an ambulance, Lily gasped, the words tumbling out. Please, call an ambulance right now. I don't understand. My father, she interrupted, pointing with a shaking hand toward the coffin. I think he's alive. The funeral director's expression shifted from concern to gentle pity. Ms. Chen, I know this is difficult. No, you don't understand, Lily insisted, her voice rising. I felt something. A pulse. Please, just check. Reluctantly, perhaps to humor a grieving daughter, the funeral director approached the coffin. Lily watched, her entire body trembling as he pressed professional fingers to her father's neck, expecting him to straighten up with a kind but firm explanation about the natural processes of death. Instead, the color drained from his face. "Oh, my God," he whispered. Within minutes, the quiet funeral home erupted into frantic activity. Someone called 911. Lily's family members, who had been waiting in another room, rushed in, confused and alarmed by the commotion. "What's happening?" her mother demanded, looking from Lily to the funeral director and back again. Lily couldn't speak. She could only watch, suspended in a moment between grief and impossible hope, as her Aunt Pat stepped forward and pressed her own fingers to her brother-in-law's neck. "Sweet Jesus," Pat breathed, crossing herself. "There's a pulse." Later, Lily would have only fragmented memories of the next hour. The wail of approaching sirens, the paramedics bursting in with equipment, the shocked voices, her mother collapsing into a chair. But one image remained crystal clear. The moment when one of the paramedics looked up from his examination and announced with stunned disbelief, "This man is alive." As they lifted her father onto a gurney, rushing him toward the waiting ambulance, Lily stood rooted to the spot, her mind struggling to process what was happening. 3 days ago, they had been told he was dead. They had washed his body, dressed him, prepared to bury him. And now everything had changed with a single embrace. The emergency room buzzed with frantic activity as doctors and nurses rushed around Lily's father. She sat in the waiting area, her mother's hand clutched tightly in hers, both women too stunned to speak. The harsh fluorescent lights made everything seem unreal, as if they had stepped into some bizarre dream. Aunt Pat paced back and forth, occasionally stopping to peer down the hallway where they had wheeled her brother-in-law. Lily's brother Jack had arrived, his face pale with shock, his 2 children left with a neighbor in the rush to get to the hospital. "This can't be happening," Jack muttered for perhaps the 10th time. "They pronounced him dead. We identified his body. How could they make a mistake like that?" No one had answers. The funeral director, who had followed them to the hospital, sat a few seats away making urgent phone calls. Lily caught fragments of his conversations, words like unprecedented and liability and investigation. None of it seemed to matter. All that mattered was what was happening behind those swinging doors, where medical professionals were working to understand how a man who had been declared dead 3 days ago could possibly be showing signs of life. A clock on the wall ticked away the minutes. 1 hour passed, then 2. Occasionally, a nurse would emerge to tell them they were running tests, that the doctors were consulting specialists, that they would know more soon. But no real information came. Lily's mother, Mai, had barely spoken since they arrived at the hospital. She stared straight ahead, her small hand cold in Lily's grasp. 61 years old and suddenly caught between widow and wife again, she seemed to have retreated deep inside herself. "Mom?" Lily said gently. "Can I get you some water or something?" Mai shook her head slightly. "How?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "How is this possible?" Lily had no answer. The memory of that faint flutter beneath her cheek kept replaying in her mind. If she hadn't asked for that final moment alone, if she hadn't embraced her father one last time, would they have buried him alive? The thought made her physically ill. Finally, nearly 3 hours after they arrived, a doctor appeared in the waiting room doorway. Dr. Rivera was a woman in her 50s, with tired eyes and silver-streaked dark hair, pulled back in a neat bun. She approached them slowly, clipboard in hand. "Family of Richard Chen?" she asked, though it was obvious who they were. The only group in the waiting area at this late hour, all of them wearing funeral clothes, their faces marked with dried tears and fresh hope. They all stood up, moving closer together as if for protection against whatever news was coming. "Is my husband alive?" Mai asked, her voice stronger now, demanding answers. Dr. Rivera gestured for them to sit back down, then pulled a chair over to face them. "Mr. Chen is exhibiting minimal but definite vital signs," she said carefully. "His heart rate is extremely slow, only about 15 beats per minute. His breathing is shallow enough that it would be nearly undetectable without equipment. His body temperature is well below normal." "But he's alive?" Jack pressed. "Yes," Dr. Rivera confirmed. "He is technically alive. However," she added quickly, raising a hand to temper their rising hope. His condition is extremely critical and unlike anything I've personally encountered before. We've brought in specialists who are better equipped to explain what might be happening. As if on cue, another doctor entered the waiting area. Dr. Patel introduced himself as a neurologist. Behind him came Dr. Winston, an expert in rare conditions. The three medical professionals sat facing the family, their expressions serious. We believe your father may be experiencing an extremely rare condition called Lazarus syndrome, combined with what appears to be profound hypothermia, Dr. Patel explained, his voice gentle but matter-of-fact. Lazarus syndrome, Lily repeated, the biblical reference not lost on her. Dr. Winston nodded. It's a documented but incredibly rare phenomenon where a person spontaneously returns to life after failed resuscitation attempts, though in most recorded cases it happens within minutes or hours after death is pronounced, not days later. The initial cardiac arrest likely triggered a state of suspended animation, Dr. Rivera added, combined with the cooling procedures. At the funeral home, they put him in a refrigeration unit, the funeral director interjected, his voice strained. Standard procedure, which would have further slowed his metabolic processes, Dr. Rivera continued. It's possible that his core body functions slowed to such a degree that they were undetectable by standard means. The family tried to absorb this information, their expressions flickering between hope, confusion, and disbelief. Will he wake up? Mai asked, her voice breaking on the final words. The doctors exchanged glances. We don't know, Dr. Patel admitted. We're providing supportive care, slowly warming his body, monitoring brain activity, providing fluids and nutrition. But this situation is so unusual that we simply can't make predictions. Can we see him? Lily asked. Briefly, Dr. Rivera agreed. He's been moved to the intensive care unit. I should prepare you. He's connected to many machines and he shows no signs of consciousness, but you can see him. The ICU was quieter than the emergency room, but filled with the soft beeping of monitors and the hissing of ventilators. Richard Chen lay in a bed surrounded by equipment, tubes and wires connecting him to machines that monitored every aspect of his bodily functions. His chest rose and fell almost imperceptibly with each shallow breath. Mai approached the bed first, her steps hesitant. She reached out to touch her husband's face, her fingertips gently tracing his features as if to convince herself he was really there. Richard, she whispered, can you hear me? There was no response, not even a flicker of his closed eyelids. Lily and Jack moved closer, standing on the opposite side of the bed. The unreality of the situation struck Lily anew. Just hours ago, they had been preparing to bury their father. His obituary had been published in the local paper. Friends had sent flowers and condolence cards. And now here he was, somehow straddling the line between life and death. The next 24 to 48 hours will be critical, Dr. Winston explained quietly from the doorway. If there's going to be improvement, we should see signs soon. They were allowed to stay for only 15 minutes before the nurses gently ushered them out, explaining that Richard needed constant monitoring and care. The family retreated to the waiting room once more, now joined by other relatives who had heard the astonishing news. As night deepened into early morning, most of the extended family went home, promising to return the next day. Jack left reluctantly to relieve his neighbor and care for his children, but Lily and her mother refused to leave. I lost him once already, Mai said firmly when the nurses suggested they go home and rest. I won't leave him again. They were given blankets and directed to a small family room where they could lie down on couches. But sleep was impossible. Lily and her mother sat side by side holding hands, sometimes speaking softly, but mostly just waiting in a state of suspended animation that seemed to mirror Richard's condition. You saved him, Mai said suddenly as dawn light began to filter through the windows. If you hadn't... She couldn't finish the sentence. The unspoken horror hung between them. The image of Richard waking in darkness, trapped, unable to call for help. Lily shuddered at the thought. I just wanted to say goodbye, she said softly. I never imagined. It's a miracle, Mai said, squeezing her daughter's hand. Whatever happens next, we've been given this much at least. A chance. Morning brought a flurry of activity. News of Richard's case had spread through the hospital, drawing curious medical staff and prompting calls from research institutions. The local media had somehow gotten wind of the story, and the hospital's public relations team was working to manage the situation. Dr. Rivera returned, accompanied by even more specialists who had arrived overnight, some from neighboring states. They huddled around Richard's bed, examining charts and discussing his condition in hushed, urgent tones. Lily watched through the ICU window, trying to interpret their expressions and body language. Were they encouraged? Concerned? It was impossible to tell. Finally, Dr. Rivera emerged to speak with them. "There are some promising signs," she said cautiously. "His body temperature has risen slightly, and his heart rate has increased to about 20 beats per minute. These are small changes, but they're moving in the right direction." "Is he in pain?" Mai asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "We don't believe so," Dr. Rivera assured her. "Brain monitoring shows minimal activity, consistent with a deep coma-like state. But it's important to note that there is activity. His brain is functioning just at a very reduced level." Throughout the day, a parade of specialists examined Richard. Neurologists, cardiologists, hypothermia experts, even a researcher who specialized in near-death experiences. Each brought their own perspective, their own theories, but none could offer definitive answers or predictions. By evening, Richard's condition had stabilized enough that Mai and Lily were allowed to sit with him for longer periods. They took turns talking to him, hoping that somewhere in his unconscious state he might hear their voices and find his way back. Lily told her father about the beautiful spring day outside, how his favorite cherry tree in the backyard was starting to bloom. Mai spoke to him in a mixture of English and Chinese, reminiscing about their early days together, reminding him of plans they had made for their retirement. As night fell again, Lily stepped out of the room to call Jack and update him. When she returned, she found her mother with her head bowed, not in grief this time but in prayer. Mai had never been particularly religious, but now she was whispering appeals to any higher power that might be listening. Lily stood quietly, not wanting to interrupt this private moment. Through the window she could see the lights of the city beginning to twinkle in the darkness. Somewhere out there, life was going on as normal. People were eating dinner, watching TV, arguing about politics, falling in love. The ordinary miracle of everyday life continued, even as her family experienced something so extraordinary it defied explanation. A soft sound from the bed drew her attention. Her mother had heard it too, her prayer cutting off mid-sentence as she looked up sharply. Richard's fingers had moved. Just a slight twitch, but definitely movement. "Dad?" Lily whispered, moving closer. His eyelids fluttered. Once, twice. Mai pressed the call button, her other hand clutching her husband's. "Richard," she called louder now. "Richard, can you hear us?" The monitors showed increased activity. Heart rate rising, brain waves changing pattern. A nurse rushed in, quickly followed by Dr. Rivera, who had been about to go off shift. "Step back, please," the doctor requested, moving to Richard's side and shining a light into his eyes. "Mr. Chen, Richard, can you hear me?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, impossibly, Richard Chen opened his eyes. Richard Chen's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually settling on the faces around him. His gaze moved from the doctor to his wife, then to his daughter, recognition dawning in his expression. His lips parted, but no sound came out. "Don't try to talk yet," Dr. Rivera advised gently. "You have a breathing tube in. Just blink if you can understand me." Richard blinked once, deliberately. The room erupted in controlled chaos. Nurses rushed in, checking vitals and adjusting equipment. Doctors were paged. Mai and Lily were ushered to the corner of the room, watching with a mixture of joy and disbelief as medical professionals swarmed around Richard. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Rivera murmured, shaking her head as she checked Richard's pupil response. His neurological function appears remarkably intact. Over the next hour, they removed Richard's breathing tube and conducted preliminary tests. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a hoarse whisper, his throat raw from days of intubation. "Water," he managed to say. A nurse held a small cup with a straw to his lips, and he took a careful sip. "Richard," Mai said, moving to her husband's side once the initial flurry of medical activity had subsided. She touched his face with trembling fingers. "Do you know who I am?" He looked at her, his eyes crinkling slightly at the corners. "My wife," he whispered. "My..." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded. "And Lily," he added, his gaze shifting to his daughter. "You found me." Lily stepped forward, taking his hand. It was warmer now, the skin no longer waxy and cold. "Yes, Dad, I found you." "Mr. Chen," Dr. Rivera interjected gently. "Do you know where you are?" Richard looked around, taking in the medical equipment, the sterile walls. "Hospital," he said softly. "Do you know why you're here?" A shadow passed over his face. "I died," he said, his voice stronger now. "Or, they thought I did." The simple statement hung in the air. It was one thing for the doctors to discuss his condition in clinical terms, another entirely to hear Richard himself acknowledge what had happened. "We need to run some tests," Dr. Rivera explained. "Your situation is quite extraordinary. Are you in any pain?" Richard considered this as if taking inventory of his body. "No," he said finally. "Just tired, very tired, and cold." "That's normal given what you've been through. We'll get you some more blankets." As the medical team prepared to move Richard for testing, Mai and Lily were asked to wait outside. They stood in the hallway, arms wrapped around each other, still struggling to process the miracle they were witnessing. "He knew me," Mai kept saying. "He knew us both." Jack arrived just as they were wheeling Richard away for an MRI. His face lit up when he heard the news of his father's awakening. "He's really conscious? He can talk?" Jack asked, his voice tight with emotion. "Yes," Lily confirmed, still dazed by the rapid turn of events. "He's weak, but he recognized us, and he's speaking." The next several hours were a blur of waiting, brief visits with Richard between tests, and conversations with doctors who seemed equally amazed by what was happening. Word of Richard's awakening had spread through the hospital and beyond. The hospital administration had assigned a security guard to the ICU entrance to keep curious onlookers and reporters at bay. By late afternoon, Richard had been moved to a private room and was sitting up slightly, supported by pillows. He still appeared frail and tired, his movements slow and deliberate. But there was life in his eyes, a spark of the man they had thought was gone forever. "The doctors keep asking me the same questions," he told his family with a weak smile. "What year is it? Who's the president? Can I count backward from 100? "And can you?" Jack asked, attempting humor to mask his lingering shock. "I keep getting stuck around 87, Richard admitted. "My mind feels fuzzy, like trying to see through fog." The doctors had explained that this was to be expected. Richard's brain had been deprived of normal levels of oxygen and blood flow for days. That he could speak and recognize his family at all was remarkable. "Dad," Lily said hesitantly, "do you remember anything? From when you were..." She couldn't finish the sentence, but Richard seemed to understand. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the window where afternoon sunlight streamed in. "I remember the garden," he said finally. "I was pruning the roses when something felt wrong. A pressure in my chest, then pain down my arm. I tried to call for help, but I couldn't make my voice work. Then darkness." He paused, his brow furrowing with the effort of recollection. "After that, it's strange. Not like sleeping. More like being underwater. Sounds were muffled. I could sense things happening around me sometimes, but couldn't respond. Couldn't move." A chill ran through Lily at his words. "You were aware?" she asked, horrified at the implication. Richard's expression was distant. "Not fully, just glimpses. Fragments." His eyes suddenly focused on her. I heard you, Lily, at the funeral home. You said you'd take care of the garden, but you'd probably kill everything. A small smile touched his lips. You mentioned the cactus. Lily's breath caught in her throat. She had said exactly that, alone with what she thought was her father's body. You heard me? He nodded slowly. Your voice was like a light, something to follow. The room fell silent as they all absorbed the implications of his words. Richard had been aware, at least partially, while they prepared his body for burial, while they grieved over him, said their goodbyes. I'm so sorry, Mai whispered, clutching her husband's hand. We didn't know. The doctor said your heart had stopped. It's not your fault, Richard assured her. I understand what happened now. The doctors explained about this Lazarus thing. Dr. Rivera had told them it was the most extreme case of Lazarus syndrome ever documented. Most cases occurred minutes or hours after death was pronounced, not days later. Richard's case was further complicated by his profound hypothermia, which had slowed his bodily functions to a barely detectable level. The funeral home refrigeration unit actually saved your life, Dr. Patel had explained. The cold preserved your brain function while your body was in this extreme state. As evening approached, the exhaustion of the day caught up with Richard. His eyelids grew heavy and his responses became slower. The doctors assured the family this was normal. His body needed rest to continue healing. You should all go home and get some proper sleep, Dr. Rivera suggested. Mr. Chen is stable and we'll be monitoring him closely all night. Mai refused to leave, but she did convince Jack and Lily to go home for a few hours. You both need showers and real food, she insisted. I'll call if anything changes. Lily returned to her apartment for the first time in days. It felt strange to be doing normal things, showering, changing clothes, making a sandwich, when her world had been so completely upended. She kept checking her phone, half expecting to hear that her father's recovery had been a dream or a mistake. After a quick meal, she lay down, intending to rest for just an hour before returning to the hospital. But exhaustion claimed her and she fell into a deep sleep. She dreamed of her father's garden. In the dream, she was a child again, helping him plant tomatoes. The soil was dark and rich between her fingers. Life finds a way, her father was saying, showing her how the tiny seeds would grow into something so much larger than themselves. You just have to give it the right conditions and then trust. When Lily woke, early morning sunlight was streaming through her blinds. She'd slept for nearly 10 hours. Panicked, she grabbed her phone, expecting missed calls from her mother. Instead, there was just a single text. Your father is doing well, getting stronger, come when you wake up. At the hospital, Lily found her father sitting fully upright in bed, eating a breakfast of bland hospital oatmeal. Mai was asleep in a chair beside him, her head at an uncomfortable angle. Jack hadn't arrived yet. Hey, Dad, Lily said softly, not wanting to wake her mother. Richard looked up, his face lighting with a smile. Lily, he said, his voice stronger than it had been the day before. You look better, less like a zombie yourself. The joke, however weak, made Lily's heart sore. This was her father, his humor, his spirit. How are you feeling? She asked, taking the seat on the other side of his bed. Like I've been hit by a truck, he admitted. Everything aches, but the doctors say that's a good sign. Nerves waking, up, circulation improving. Lily studied him. He was still pale, still moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had betrayed them, but his eyes were clearer today, more present. The news people are going crazy, he told her, gesturing toward the window. There's a whole crowd of them outside the hospital. The nurses showed me some of the headlines. He shook his head in disbelief. Man returns from the dead. Miracle at City Hospital. Like something from those tabloids at the grocery checkout. It is pretty unbelievable, Dad, Lily pointed out. People are calling it a miracle. Richard was quiet for a moment, pushing the oatmeal around his bowl. I don't know about miracles, he said finally, but I do know I wasn't ready to go. He looked up at her, his eyes suddenly intense. There were things I still needed to do, people I needed to be with. The conversation shifted as doctors arrived for morning rounds. They were pleased with Richard's progress, though cautious about making predictions. "We're in uncharted territory," Dr. Rivera reminded them. "We'll take this day by day." Throughout the morning, specialists continued to examine Richard. They tested his reflexes, his memory, his cognitive function. They took blood samples and monitored his heart. Between these clinical interruptions, Richard spoke more about his experience. "It was like being in two places at once," he explained, struggling to find the right words. "Part of me was somewhere else, somewhere peaceful. But another part was still here, aware of what was happening to my body." "Was it like those near-death experiences you hear about?" Lily asked carefully. "Bright lights, tunnels, that sort of thing?" Richard considered this. "Not exactly. It wasn't visual like that, more like feelings, sensations." He paused, looking troubled. "But there's something important, something I need to remember." "About what you experienced?" "Yes," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "It feels significant, but it's just beyond my reach, like trying to remember a dream after you wake up." As the day progressed, Richard grew stronger. The doctors were amazed at his recovery rate. "Your body seems eager to make up for lost time," Dr. Patel remarked during an afternoon checkup. By evening, Richard was able to stand for short periods, supported by a nurse on one side and Mai on the other. His first few steps were shaky but determined. "I need to get back to my garden," he said, his face flushed with the exertion of walking to the bathroom and back. Spring planting season won't wait, even for a man who came back from the dead. The casual way he referenced his experience startled Lily. But perhaps humor was his way of processing something so profound, it defied ordinary understanding. As night fell once more, Richard grew quiet again, his expression thoughtful, as he gazed out the window at the darkening sky. "What is it, Dad?" Lily asked, noticing the shift in his mood. "I just remembered," he said softly. "What I was trying to recall earlier. About what you experienced?" Lily moved closer, sitting on the edge of his bed. Richard nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "We're all connected, Lily. Everything is, in ways we can't see or understand when we're caught up in our daily lives." He took her hand in his. "Death isn't the end. It's a doorway. I was just beginning to step through when you called me back." His words sent a shiver through her. "Are you saying you chose to come back?" "I heard your voice," he said simply. "I felt your embrace. And I knew it wasn't my time yet." He squeezed her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "You saved me, Lily, in more ways than you can possibly know." 2 weeks after his miraculous awakening, Richard Chen was finally going home. The medical team had been reluctant to release him, fascinated as they were by his unprecedented case. But his recovery had progressed steadily. His strength was returning. His cognitive functions had sharpened, and there seemed no medical reason to keep him in the hospital any longer. "You understand. You'll need to come back for regular checkups," Dr. Rivera reminded him as she signed his discharge papers. "Your case is, well, there's no protocol for this situation." "I'll bring him," Mai promised, standing protectively beside her husband's wheelchair. Hospital policy required patients to leave in wheelchairs, though Richard had been walking short distances on his own for several days now. As a nurse wheeled Richard toward the hospital exit, staff members lined the hallways. Some were people who had cared for him directly. Others simply wanted to witness the departure of the man who had defied death itself. A few reached out to touch his shoulder or hand as he passed, as if some of the miracle might rub off on them. "I feel like a circus attraction," Richard muttered to Lily, who walked beside him. "You kind of are, Dad," she replied with a gentle smile. "Not everyone comes back from the dead." Outside, reporters had gathered despite the hospital's attempts to keep Richard's discharge date private. Camera flashes popped as the automatic doors opened. Microphones were thrust forward. "Mr. Chen, how does it feel to be alive again?" Do you remember being dead? Was there a white light, Mr. Chen? Did you see heaven? Jack stepped forward, shielding his father from the barrage of questions. My father is still recovering, he said firmly. We're asking for privacy at this time. Hospital security helped clear a path to Mai's car, which was waiting at the curb. As they settled Richard into the passenger seat, he looked back at the hospital building where he had spent the past 2 weeks. Never thought I'd be glad to leave a place that saved my life, he said. The drive home was quiet, Richard watching the familiar streets pass by with new eyes. Spring was in full bloom now, trees heavy with fresh leaves, gardens bright with flowers. Everything looked so vibrant, he remarked. The colors seemed more intense. When they pulled into the driveway of the modest 2-story home where Richard and Mai had lived for nearly 30 years, Richard sat motionless for a long moment, just staring at the house. His eyes lingered on the cherry tree in the front yard, now covered in pale pink blossoms, then moved to the garden beds where green shoots were pushing up through the soil. "Welcome home," Mai said softly, covering his hand with hers. Inside, everything was just as it had been, yet somehow different. The furniture, the photographs on the walls, the stack of gardening magazines on the coffee table, all ordinary things that had suddenly become extraordinary because Richard was here to see them again. Jack's children, 10-year-old David and 7-year-old Amy, had been told a simplified version of what happened to their grandfather. The doctors made a mistake, Jack had explained. Grandpa was very sick, but he wasn't really gone. Now he's better and coming home. The full truth was too complex, too strange for them to fully grasp, just as it was for the adults. The children were waiting inside with Jack's wife Nancy, who had prepared a welcome home meal. Amy had made a banner that hung across the living room. "Welcome back, Grandpa," decorated with hearts and stars. "Grandpa." The children cried when Richard walked through the door, moving forward as if to rush him but stopping short, suddenly uncertain. Richard smiled, opening his arms to them. "It's okay," he assured them. "I won't break." After a moment's hesitation, they came to him, hugging him gently. "Dad said you were in heaven, but you came back," Amy whispered. Richard exchanged a glance with Jack over the children's heads. "Something like that," he said carefully. The homecoming dinner was a strange mix of celebration and awkwardness. They all tried to act normal, to treat this like any family gathering, but there was no ignoring the extraordinary circumstance that had brought them together. The empty chair where Richard now sat had so recently been a source of grief. The obituary Jack had written was still pinned to Mai's corkboard in the kitchen, not yet taken down. As they ate, Richard was quieter than usual, observing his family, with an intensity that hadn't been part of his personality before. He watched Mai as she served the food, Jack as he helped David cut his meat, Nancy as she chatted about neighborhood news. His gaze was thoughtful, almost contemplative. "Are you tired, Dad?" Lily asked, noticing his silence. "We can wrap this up if you need to rest." "I'm fine," Richard assured her, "just taking it all in." He smiled, but there was something different in his expression, a depth that hadn't been there before. "Do you realize how precious this is? All of us, here, together, eating, talking, just being alive." The simple observation created a momentary pause in the conversation. Then Jack raised his glass. "To being alive," he said, "and to having you back, Dad." They all drank to that, even the children with their apple juice solemnity briefly touching their young faces. After dinner, while the others cleaned up, Richard asked to go outside. "I want to see my garden," he explained when Mai looked concerned. "Just for a few minutes." Lily accompanied him, walking slowly beside him as he made his way across the backyard to the carefully tended vegetable and flower beds. The early spring plantings were emerging, rows of peas sending up delicate tendrils, lettuce forming small green rosettes, flower bulbs pushing their first leaves through the soil. "It looks good," Lily said. "Mom and I tried to keep up with your planting schedule. We followed the notes in your gardening journal." Richard nodded, but he seemed distracted, his attention caught by something beyond the physical state of the garden. He lowered himself carefully onto the wooden bench at the garden's edge, patting the space beside him for Lily to join him. "I've been thinking a lot about what I experienced," he said after a moment of silence, trying to make sense of it. Lily waited, knowing her father needed to process this in his own way. "Before all this happened, I thought I knew what was important," he continued. "I worked hard my whole life, saved for retirement, worried about the stock market and property values and whether the neighbors would approve of our fence height." He shook his head slightly. "Such small concerns." "They're normal concerns, Dad," Lily said. "That's just life." "But that's just it," Richard insisted, turning to face her. "That's not life, not really. It's just existing, going through the motions." His voice grew more animated than it had been since his awakening. "Life is this." He gestured to the garden. "Growth, connection, transformation. The way these plants push through the soil even though it's hard, even though there's resistance." Lily studied her father's face in the fading evening light. He'd always been a practical man, more interested in tangible things than philosophical concepts. This new perspective was unexpected. "What are you saying, Dad? That nearly dying changed your outlook?" "Not nearly dying," he corrected gently. "Actually dying, and yes, it changed everything." He took her hand. "I saw what matters, Lily. And it's not the things I spent most of my life chasing." In the weeks that followed, it became clear that Richard's transformation went beyond the physical miracle of his revival. The man who had returned was fundamentally changed from the one who had collapsed in his garden that spring morning. The old Richard had been pleasant, but reserved, a creature of routine who rarely deviated from his established patterns. He'd been focused on security, on providing for his family, on maintaining the status quo. A good man, but a cautious one. The new Richard approached each day with a sense of wonder and purpose that startled those who knew him well. He spoke more openly about his feelings. He laughed more easily. He spent less time watching the news and more time playing with his grandchildren. He gave away many of his possessions, saying he had no need for so much stuff. "You've worked your whole life for these things," Mai protested when he talked about selling his prized vintage car collection. "You love those cars." "I enjoyed them," Richard corrected. "But they're just things, Mai. I don't need them anymore." Instead, he channeled his energy into new directions. He expanded his garden, donating most of the produce to local food banks. He volunteered at the hospital where he'd been treated, sitting with patients who had no visitors. He began recording his experience and insights, filling notebook after notebook with his thoughts. The medical community remained fascinated by his case. Richard agreed to participate in research studies, allowing doctors to monitor his ongoing recovery and trying to help them understand what had happened to him. But he declined most media interviews, uncomfortable with being treated as a novelty. One exception was a short conversation with a local reporter who approached him at a community garden event. "People want to know if you saw heaven," the young journalist said. Richard considered the question seriously. "I didn't see pearly gates or angels, if that's what you're asking," he replied. "But I experienced something that convinced me we're more than just our physical bodies. That consciousness continues." He smiled at the reporter's eager expression. "Beyond that, I think some things are meant to remain mysteries." The story ran in the local paper and was quickly picked up by national outlets. Soon, Richard was receiving letters from around the country, people sharing their own near-death experiences, asking for advice, seeking comfort about lost loved ones. He answered as many as he could, though he was careful not to position himself as any kind of spiritual authority. "I just know what I experienced," he told Lily when she helped him sort through the correspondence. "I can't claim to have all the answers." For Lily, watching her father's transformation was both inspiring and occasionally unsettling. The changes in him were largely positive. He seemed more present, more engaged with life. But there were moments when she glimpsed something in his eyes that seemed almost otherworldly, as if part of him was still connected to whatever he had experienced during those 3 days. 6 weeks after Richard's return home, Lily came to visit and found him sitting in his garden, eyes closed, face tilted toward the sun. She stood watching him for a moment before he sensed her presence and looked up. "Lily," he said warmly, "come sit with me." She joined him on the bench, noticing how much stronger he looked now. He had regained most of the weight he'd lost during his hospital stay. His movements were more fluid, his color healthier. Physically, he was almost back to his old self. "How are you feeling?" she asked, a question that had taken on layers of meaning beyond the usual casual inquiry. "Good," he said. "More myself every day." He paused, then added, "Or perhaps more accurately, more of my true self." "And what's your true self like?" Lily asked, genuinely curious. Richard smiled. "Still discovering that, but I know it's someone who sees more clearly now." He reached out to touch a budding rose. "Before, I gardened because I enjoyed it. Now I understand that I'm part of the same process as these plants, growing, blooming, returning to the earth, beginning again." "That sounds very philosophical," Lily said, trying to reconcile this mystical perspective with her practical father. "I know it must seem strange," Richard acknowledged, "and I don't expect everyone to understand. How could they without experiencing what I did?" He turned to her, his expression earnest. "But you, Lily, you were the bridge. Your love called me back when I was between worlds." Lily felt a shiver run through her, remembering that moment in the funeral home when she had felt the flutter beneath her cheek. "I just couldn't let you go," she said softly. "And that's the power of connection," Richard said. "Stronger even than death." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, Lily found herself thinking about how close they had come to a completely different outcome. In another version of this story, they would have buried her father. She would be grieving now instead of sitting beside him, watching butterflies flit among his flowers. "What are you thinking?" Richard asked, noticing her pensive expression. "That I'm grateful," Lily replied simply. "For whatever miracle or medical anomaly or cosmic second chance brought you back to us." Richard nodded, his eyes reflecting the golden light of sunset. "Every moment is a gift now," he said. "Every single one." As they sat together in the quiet garden, Lily realized that her father's extraordinary experience had transformed not just him, but all of them. They had been given a rare glimpse beyond the veil that separates life and death, a reminder of how precious and mysterious existence truly is. And in that knowledge, there was both wonder and responsibility, to live more fully, to love more deeply, and to recognize the miracle that exists in even the most ordinary moments. 6 months had passed since that extraordinary day in the funeral home when Lily's embrace had revealed her father was still alive. Half a year since Richard Chen had defied medical explanation and returned from what everyone had believed was death. The leaves that had been just beginning to bud when Richard collapsed in his garden had grown, flourished through summer, and now were turning gold and red as autumn arrived. On this crisp October morning, Richard stood at a podium in the hospital auditorium, addressing a room full of medical professionals, researchers, and students. At 64, he looked remarkably healthy. His posture straight, his eyes clear and bright, his voice strong as he spoke. "I'm not here to offer scientific explanations," he was saying. "The doctors have their theories about what happened to me, and I'll let them share those. I'm here to tell you what it's taught me, about life, about our connections to each other, and about how we approach death in our society." In the audience, Lily watched her father with a mixture of pride and amazement. The shy private man who had once avoided public speaking at all costs now commanded the room with quiet confidence. Behind him, a screen displayed the logo of the Chen Family Foundation, an organization that hadn't existed 6 months ago. The foundation had been Richard's idea, conceived during his recovery. "We need to do something with this experience," he had told his family. "Something that helps others." The Chen Family Foundation had 2 main focuses: advocating for improved death certification procedures to prevent premature declarations of death, and providing support for families navigating unusual medical situations. In the relatively short, Time since its creation, the Foundation had already partnered with several major hospitals to review and enhance their protocols. My case isn't unique, Richard continued, his gaze sweeping across the audience. Throughout history, there have been accounts of people pronounced dead who later revived. Most weren't as dramatic as mine. They typically happened within minutes or hours, not days. But each represents a failure in our medical systems, a gap in our understanding of the transition between life and death. Lily noticed her mother, sitting in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. For Mai, the journey had been particularly complex. She had mourned her husband, accepted his death, begun the painful process of imagining life without him, only to have him returned in a way that defied explanation. Their relationship had deepened through this experience, taking on a new dimension of appreciation and understanding. We're not just advocating for better procedures, Richard said. We're asking for a fundamental shift in how we think about death. Not as a single moment, but as a process, one that might be more fluid than we've previously understood. After the presentation, there was a small reception. Richard was surrounded by doctors and researchers, all eager to discuss his case and the Foundation's work. Lily hung back, watching her father navigate these conversations with grace. Every so often, his eyes would find hers across the room, and they would share a smile, a private acknowledgement of the extraordinary journey they had taken together. Dr. Rivera, who had been one of Richard's primary physicians during his recovery, approached Lily with a cup of coffee. "Your father is remarkable," she said. "Most people who go through a trauma like his withdraw from the world. He's done the opposite." "He says he was given a second chance for a reason," Lily replied. "He doesn't want to waste it." "The work your foundation is doing is already making a difference," Dr. Rivera told her. "We've implemented new protocols based on your father's case, more thorough examinations, longer monitoring periods before death is certified, especially in cases of hypothermia or cardiac events." She shook her head slightly. "I still can't believe I was part of this. In 30 years of medicine, I've never seen anything like it." "Sometimes I can't believe it either," Lily admitted. "There are moments when I wake up and wonder if I dreamed the whole thing." After the reception, the family gathered at Richard and Mai's home for dinner, a tradition they had maintained every Sunday since Richard's return. Jack and Nancy were there with their children, as well as Aunt Pat and a few close friends who had supported them through the ordeal. The dining room was warm and fragrant with Mai's cooking. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the occasional playful argument. To a casual observer, it would have looked like any family dinner. But for those present, each of these gatherings held a deeper significance, a celebration of continued life, of bonds that had withstood the ultimate test. After dinner, while the others moved to the living room for dessert, Richard asked Lily to join him in the garden. The evening air was cool, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. The garden was different now. Richard had redesigned it in the months since his return, creating winding paths and quiet sitting areas among the plants. "I've been thinking about that day a lot recently," Richard said as they walked slowly along one of the paths. "The day you found me?" "Me too," Lily admitted. "The anniversary is coming up soon." Richard nodded. 6 months, hard to believe. He stopped beside a small fountain he had installed, its gentle splashing creating a soothing background. "I wanted to tell you something I haven't shared with the others." Lily looked at him curiously. Despite his newfound openness, there were aspects of his experience that Richard still kept private, saying they were too personal or too difficult to articulate. "I've told everyone that I don't remember much from those 3 days," Richard continued, "that it was mostly darkness with occasional awareness of what was happening around me." "That's not true?" Lily asked. "It's partially true," Richard corrected. "There was darkness at first, but then there was something else." He seemed to struggle for words. "I don't talk about it because it sounds crazy, and because I don't want to become one of those people who claim to have all the answers about the afterlife." He sat on a stone bench beside the fountain, inviting Lily to join him. "But you deserve to know. You were the one who called me back. What did you experience, Dad? Lily asked softly. Richard was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. I was somewhere else, he said finally. Somewhere beyond physical reality as we understand it. I can't describe it in terms of sights or sounds. Our language doesn't have the right words. It was more like pure awareness, pure love. He looked up at the emerging stars. I felt connected to everything. Every person I'd ever known. Every life on this planet. Every particle of the universe. There was no separation, no barriers between self and other. His voice was hushed, reverent. And there was a profound sense of being home, of returning to where I truly belonged. Lily listened, trying to imagine such an experience. If it was so beautiful, why did you come back? Richard turned to her, his eyes reflecting the garden lights. Because I heard you. In that state of complete connection, I could feel your grief, your love. I could hear you saying goodbye, telling me you'd take care of the garden. He smiled slightly. And I realized I wasn't quite ready to leave. That there were things left for me to do here. He took her hand. You literally called me back from the brink, Lily. Your love was a lifeline that I could follow home, back to this world. Tears filled Lily's eyes at his words. She had carried a complicated mix of emotions about her role in her father's revival. Gratitude that she had discovered he was alive, but also lingering guilt that if she hadn't, he might have been buried alive. So you chose to return? She asked. Yes, Richard said simply. And I've never regretted it for a moment. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the fountain and the rustle of leaves in the gentle evening breeze. Haven't told Mai all of this, Richard said eventually. Or Jack. I think it would be too much for them right now. They're still processing what happened on a practical level. Why tell me? Lily asked. Because you're ready to hear it, Richard replied. And because you were my anchor, the connection between those two states of being. You deserve to know the full story. As they walked back toward the house, where warm light spilled from the windows and the sounds of family conversation and laughter could be heard, Richard added, I don't have all the answers, Lily. I glimpsed something profound, but it's like trying to describe an ocean when you've only seen a drop of water. Whatever lies beyond this life is bigger than any of us can comprehend. Inside, the family had gathered around the piano. Jack's daughter Amy was playing a simple tune she had learned in her lessons. Her face screwed up in concentration. Mai was helping serve dessert, laughing at something Nancy had said. Jack was showing Aunt Pat photos on his phone. Ordinary moments, made extraordinary by the simple fact of presence. Richard paused in the doorway, watching them all with an expression of profound appreciation. This, he said quietly to Lily, this is what I came back for. These moments, these connections. In the year that followed, the Chen Family Foundation grew beyond anything they had initially imagined. Richard's story, though extraordinary, had struck a chord with people around the world, opening conversations about death, consciousness, and the medical practices surrounding end-of-life care. Research grants funded by the foundation led to new protocols being adopted in hospitals across the country. Families who had experienced similar medical mysteries found support and understanding through the foundation's network. Richard's gentle advocacy helped shift the conversation about death from something feared and avoided to something approached with greater awareness and compassion. For Lily, the experience transformed her life in unexpected ways. She left her corporate job to work full-time for the foundation, finding purpose in helping others navigate medical crises. She began speaking alongside her father at conferences and hospitals, sharing her perspective as the person who had discovered him alive. People always ask me if I believe in miracles now, Lily would say during these talks. And my answer is yes, but perhaps not in the way they expect. The miracle wasn't just that my father survived against all odds. The real miracle was how it changed us, how it opened our eyes to what truly matters.